Okay, great. Okay, hi to my panelists. Hello, Folashade.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you? I love the background. You see? It's not too bad.
I just managed to find something.
It's beautiful. Hello, Esther. Look at you. I love the hair. Hello.
Hi. Hey, good to see both of you.
Hello.
And how's it in Kenya? You there for a bit, eh?
Yes. I'm in a hotel room, so I've tried to find a view that doesn't show my bed. This is it.
Look, I always have a white wall. That's all I have. It's so boring. I found a white wall. I think we're just waiting for Mina now. Okay, let me just make sure. Hold in, Mina. But otherwise, I think I've kind of described it. So please, can we be mindful of time? I'm not sure if you all saw the session before, but like, I don't want to interrupt you guys and say, sorry guys, we need to cut. So if you could please just be mindful of like 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Hello, Mina.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Awesome. I have the base panel of the entire Congress. I'm not biased. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think what we might have to do is during the sessions, if you, when I do the introductions, you can all leave your microphones on. Like, I don't know who's group calling me. Oh, it's our group. We're all in. It's fine.
Oh, it's me. I think I pressed something.
Okay.
I'm calling everyone. I'm sorry.
Okay, maybe this will be afterwards when you're all chilling. So what we'll do is, I think when I do the intros, you can all leave your cameras on. I think that also is fine. It's not a biggie. But I'm hearing an echo as I speak. I think I don't know whose it is, but it might have been you, Esther. Okay, so you might have to mute, but can you please remember to unmute when you are speaking? Because otherwise it'll be like, you're muted, and that'll be the whole session. Okay, I don't know if there are any questions while we wait for us going in. No? Okay, the whole objective, I mean, look, we don't have much time. We literally have 25 minutes for an entire topic that's probably 2 days. So I think the whole idea is really, we saw each of your expertise. So Esther in research, Folashade as a supplier, as a manufacturer of products, and then Mina in your work in designing, and so the demand side of it. So we kind of thought if we can even extract just one powerful next step, practical next step for the Mina and I always say Mina in Africa, but for the Middle East and Africa region, then we're all good to go. Okay.
For me. So we're actually you're only going to ask us a question each. Is that correct, or 2 questions? Well, time permitting.
So I think we're just about to start because everyone has joined the session. Hi, Dominica. But how it will work is we'll do the opening remarks and then we'll do closing remarks with the time that we have. So all good. Thanks all.
Good to go. Excellent. Thank you, panelists, and welcome everybody. Hope you've navigated your way to this next session, and I hope you enjoyed our previous session. Here now we are going to be talking about embodied carbon. So embodied carbon in buildings has a substantial and lasting environmental impact, especially since buildings are currently responsible for 39% of global related energy carbon, and 11% of that embodied carbon is embodied. And so I would like to welcome to the stage Vere, our moderator for the session today. Vere is the CEO of Green Design Africa and Green Design Capital. She is a multiple award-winning engineer and green building consultant and supports the World Green Building Council, Mina and Africa regional networks with a focus on the Africa Outreach Committee. Vere has traveled extensively across Africa to train professionals and businesses on green building and green building certifications. And for her work in climate action and climate diplomacy in green buildings, Vere was selected as one of Forbes 30 under 30 in 2018. Vere also holds a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Cape Town and is a Green Star accredited professional with the Green Building Council South Africa and the Green Building Council of Australia. So thank you again for being here with us, Vere. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Dominica. It has been such a great Congress so far. I think I'm one of those people who I just want to stay in this room until like the end of the year and just have these conversations, because I think that it's so important, specifically now post-pandemic, looking at the green recovery and looking how we can address some of these requirements of the Paris Agreement is something that I think all of us want to be a part of. So hi to everyone who's joining us. We're really grateful to have you in the room. Would love to engage with you in the session. So if you could please put your questions in the chat, that would be great. We also do have a hashtag MEA Green Building, and we also do, and you can also at WorldGBC if you have anything that you'd like to put on Twitter. And I think another thing that I'd love to just mention is that if you are sitting in this room and you're from a country that currently doesn't have a member that is a part of the WorldGBC, then why not reach out to the team? You can reach out if you're from Africa, you can reach out to africa@worldgbc.org. And if you're from the Middle East or North Africa region, you can reach out to Mina at worldgbc.org. Would love to see and get more people around the table. So today we're specifically going to carry on the conversation before. Earlier on, we looked at retrofitting and how we can get net zero when you're retrofitting existing buildings. And the question even came up of embodied carbon. Is net zero embodied carbon within reach, specifically in our region? And so we have a really great panel lined up who's going to speak into this really well. The panelists today are Esther Obonyo, who is an associate professor of engineering, design and architectural engineering at the Pennsylvania State University. We also have Folashade Ambrose-Medebem, who is the Communications, Public Affairs and Sustainable Development Director from Lafarge, Africa. And we also have Mina Hasman, who is the Associate Director, Sustainability Lead for Owings and Merrill. So the beauty about this panel is that we have someone who's in research, someone who's a supplier, so supply side of building materials, and then someone who assists with design. And so kind of going around the room because we don't have too much time, and I know that we have a lot we want to chat through. I'll just start with the opening questions, and the first question will just go to you, Esther. So if you can kind of set the scene for everyone who's in the room right now, what is embodied energy, and why is it important to address embodied carbon in buildings and infrastructure? So why does this actually matter?
All right, thank you, Vere, and thank you everyone else who's attending the session. It's my pleasure to be part of this panel. As we've heard from the previous session, building emissions are responsible for 39% of buildings are responsible for 39% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And in the previous session, we looked at operating carbon emissions that come from heating, electrification, and cooling of buildings. Embodied carbon emissions, on the other hand, are from the mining, the harvesting, processing, manufacturing, transportation, and installation of building materials. This is a critical driver for climate change. And actually, the part that is most critical is part of what is called the cradle to get, the life cycle stage of building, the raw material extraction, the processing, and the manufacturing. There is evidence that the carbon emissions that are associated with the supply chain of the building materials, the big bulk is fuel consumptions associated with mining, the material, and also from the procurement, the transportation. I visited a project recently where they were using this photochromatic glass on the window that performs really well in terms of keeping the internal temperature conditions stable. However, I was kind of surprised when I was told where it came from. It had traveled halfway across the world. So it's important to pay attention to data that if you're focusing on the fact that it is helping to reduce the operational energy, you're missing the point completely. It is important for us to take into account the distance that the material has traveled. Why is it important for us to start talking about this now? The 2020s is our last window of opportunity to limit the global warming levels to 1.5 degrees. We can do this. It is also the time when we're also expecting extreme weather events that are linked to greenhouse gas emissions to continue increasing in frequency and intensity. We are also beginning to see intersecting disasters. We are also seeing social justice concerns rise to the top across the globe, and including places in Africa where you have vulnerable populations continuing to reside in substandard housing. We know urban population is going to swell. A lot of the growth, 5 billion people who will be expected to increase in the urban areas between now and 2030, a lot of that is going to be in Africa and sub-Saharan Africa. So this is the time, really. The 2020s is our window of opportunity to address the root cause of the problem. Buildings are responsible for extreme weather events. Buildings are compounding social justice and inequality. We can solve this. Embodied carbons with the 11% contribution is something that can be done upfront before the project is constructed. And it is something that has to be done because once the buildings are constructed, the carbon emissions are going to be locked in. We know that most of the buildings that are going to be constructed over the next 40 years are going to occupy space. The numbers that are out there, 2.5 trillion square feet of new floor space is going to show up over the next 40 years. Some people analogize this to New York. They say this is equivalent to adding a new city of New York every 40 days. A more recent one I saw, they say Paris. It's like adding Paris every single week. So we have the opportunity, we have the problem. We know the causes of the problem. We know how to solve them. We know that the embodied carbon that is linked to the mining and also transportation of building materials can significantly reduce the greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from the building sector. It is time to act now.
So important, Esther. So thank you for really setting the scene, which is to say that at the end of the day, our regions, Middle East and Africa regions, are the most vulnerable to climate change, and buildings contribute 39% to that. But 11% of that energy is actually in just manufacturing the products and really the building materials. So I think that speaks a lot into the urgency and why this should matter for every single person in the room. And I think that goes to you, Folashade. So if we know that it's these building materials that lock in the carbon before we even start with the, operating the building and switching on the lights, there's already carbon emissions that have gone in the building. So, from your role as part of Lafarge Wholesome, which is doing some great work in actually decreasing the embodied carbon within some of your materials that you do. I think the question would be, how do we get the systemic change from the supply side in order to kind of, get these material suppliers, factories, all of the different people who contribute to the embodied carbon? How do we change this systemically from the supply perspective?
Well, quite frankly, I think it's more around when you're asking what's the biggest signal that you want to see, essentially is what you're trying to ask me. And I think, first of all, let me say thank you to the World Green Business Council for the invitation. Good afternoon to all participants. Well, the biggest signal is the signal to collaborate. And when I say that, it's the signal to collaborate in a resolute and committed way. And we all know for a fact, and you just heard my fellow panelists state, delivering net carbon products demands a collective combined effort from everyone across all the key sectors, which you already alluded to. And we're talking about the government, the investors, the designers, property managers, all the players, all the stakeholders alike. And it's very, very important that not only do they collaborate, there's also got to be a significant shift in the skills and the understanding and the upskilling of the industry as well. And it's through these deliberate actions of the councils, all the players that I already mentioned, and that there's a joint effort to curb these issues and make sure that we do collectively achieve the zero carbon emissions that we're looking for. Technical solutions are incredibly important, and I'll illustrate. Last year, Lafarge Wholesome announced its commitment to becoming a net zero company and launched its net zero pledge with the United Nations Global Compact campaign. That's an example of a collaborative commitment stated. And not only that, they're further illustrated the technical requirement and analysis and information and data required. So we collaborated with the Science Based Targets Initiative, SBTI, because clearly we stated a number, net zero, that needs to be achieved, and that needs to be achieved in a very consistently sustainable way. So how do we've collaborated in order to accelerate our reduction in CO2, CO2 intensity to exceed the 20% compared to the 2018 baseline. We've partnered with them and stated by 2030, this is our goal. And when we stated that specific goal, it's really about making sure that we achieve that climate change of 1.5 degrees for the future, centigrade for the future in the cement sector. So clearly, I've just alluded and illustrated just what I mean by that in particular. And it's really this cross-industry solutions to accelerate the reduction of carbon emissions that is required by each and every one of us. And it does require courage, it does require a shift, and it does require resilience. So I think that's really important that we all have to be aligned. We need to understand, and most importantly, the signal that we all need to have is that important signal to collaborate.
Amazing. I love that you really speak into it in terms of collaboration. So everyone being involved, it's not only, you know, the research institutions, but it's the property developers, it's the property owners, it's the engineers, it's everyone. And I think I love that you also mentioned that it's just taking that step. So like how it's collaborating with the science-based targets, but it's just taking the one step, understanding that net zero is a journey. It's not a destination, but everyone can do that much better with every step. Exactly. So that's brilliant. Thank you. And I think that that leads then into Mina. So from your side as someone who's actually designing these spaces, you know how it is when you're looking for a material that complies with, you know, net zero, you're trying to really design a net zero building. Sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to find some of these products. So I guess the question for you would be, what measures do you think that professional teams or even property developers can take to reduce embodied carbon from their projects while the sector continues to transform? So while some of the great companies are, you know, committing to decreasing their carbon, what can designers do? What can engineers and architects and quantity surveyors, what can they do to help solve this problem?
Thank you for that valuable question, Vere. And I also should say thank you and thanks to the World Green Building Council for inviting me to be a part of this exciting panel and very important discussion today. If I may answer your question in 3 parts, and we'll touch upon perhaps something that both Esther and Folashade previously touched upon, but I think collaboration is of essence. But if I may go back and just reiterate, perhaps looking at what built environment professionals, designers, as well as property developers could do, is that I think there are 3 key components. One is if there are existing buildings in place, then reusing those existing buildings, and also additionally investigating opportunities to bringing existing building materials that will need to be removed as part of the renovation or upgrading process into the market. In other words, treating the existing building materials on site as material banks that we can draw from and reuse can actually significantly reduce embodied carbon emissions associated with that one particular project or a series of portfolio of projects if that's applicable. And so that's one thing that designers can already think about from day one without even yet considering what kind of new materials they would like to bring into their projects. And as an example, in one of our recent projects at SOM, by simply also by reusing existing building materials on a renovation project, we were able to divert 98% of what would have been a replacement or demolition, partial demolition waste from landfill. So that has significantly reduced embodied carbon emissions, pollution, but as well as also waste that will be associated with that. But if there are new buildings that are being considered, for example, then designing these buildings for disassembly and deconstruction at the end of their life, but while also considering very carefully their replacement cycles, because it doesn't matter how amazingly high performing a building is designed and constructed today, it will inevitably need upgrading and renovation. So understanding those key replacement cycles throughout the life of a built environment and designing for those replacement cycles so that the building parts and components can be taken away very efficiently and can also be used again. So those materials, and this goes back to my original point, if we are taking parts of the buildings at their 30, 40, 50-year life cycle, replacement cycle, then how can we as designers and asset owners ensure that those built materials or components can have continuous life beyond that one built environment purpose that they served? And I think lastly, if I may also reiterate what both Esther and Folashade previously mentioned, is this importance of the cross-sectoral collaboration. especially now that we're facing a multitude of challenges, quite complex ones that require very holistic and multifaceted solutions. There is no way a single organization, a single firm or corporate entity would be able to address these quite complex challenges by themselves. So it's really important to emphasize the cross collaboration. And I see this, and as Esther had previously defined, the embodied carbon by definition is quite complex and involves quite a few actors in play, and therefore it's important that all those actors are very much aligned along the supply as well as the value chain of the sector, so that the chain is very much strong and there is no weak links within the chain, to ensure that the intended design outcome at early design stages of any project can become a reality at the end. Thank you.
Brilliant. So like if I kind of look at, and I know I said like we have such little time for something that could be a 2-day conference just to talk about, you know, embodied carbon. But if we kind of look at some of the summaries, so, you know, Esther, you spoke about that the 20s is the time that we have to actually outwork this in terms of understanding that buildings are a large contributor. And then Folashade, you spoke a lot about cross-sectoral collaboration and how it's really taking those important and decisive steps as a supplier, if you're on supply side, to change that. And then Mina, you spoke around the 3 aspects. So if it's an existing building, look at it as a material bank. Don't demolish a building that's got embodied carbon in it. Look at it as a material bank. If it's new, then look at disassembly, deconstruction, as well as replacement, and then cross-sector collaboration. So we literally have like time for 2 minutes because there are lots of questions coming in, which is always great. But I think what I would almost do is I'll see if we can kind of do the closing remarks, but there are some questions. Well, there's some questions for all of you, but I think we'll just start with you, Mina, and we'll close with you, Esther, in terms of just how we'll do our closing remarks. And if you, in your closing remark, you can just touch on some of the questions that we received. So Mina, I think in your closing remark, there was a question that we received from, let me just find it quickly, from Baruch, which said, how can we use BIM? So for those who don't know, BIM is building information modeling and energy modeling software. How can we use that kind of software to really address embodied carbon in the design of a building to start off with? So if you can just answer that maybe in like a minute, and then I'll go to closing remarks afterwards.
Thank you, Vere, and thank you for that question. It's a very valid one, and it can be discussed extensively. But what I could say is actually the technological advancements, and as well as also softwares, new softwares, BIM is one of the sort of examples of it, and there are many others that are enabling us to embed that material knowledge base and data and information, almost like ingredients of materials, can already be embedded in today's sort of softwares when we use them, which can actually leverage how those materials or building components need to be upgraded when they are sort of losing their fit for purpose opportunities at the end of their replacement cycles. Then there's a great understanding of what the material ingredients were, and we can leverage BIM, and building passports can be created as out of BIM actually, so that we can really understand what is it in the buildings and what kind of replacement cycles they will require and how they can be most effectively repurposed. I think that's one way of quickly answering it. Hopefully,
that is true, but that's helpful. So there is a way that one can use BIM to do that. And I think there are 2 questions I'll just pass on to you, Folashade. The one is from Roger, just saying, you know, cement is one of those with high embodied carbon, and you spoke so clearly about some of the things that Lafarge is doing. And there's also a comment from Moody that says that there's quite a lot of imported materials, which also then now adds to embodied energy, because embodied energy includes things like transport. So how do we address that in terms of everyone importing? So if you're not specifically only looking at like Lafarge, but how do we decrease the carbon footprint in like one line for someone who doesn't really know?
Two levers: innovation, and digital. So what we are doing is we're very, very conscious and making sure that we're building greener, and we're also building smarter. So we're leveraging digital, and I'll elaborate on digital. For example, we're now using 3D printing, and that's really a much more easier way to build, and it's also affordable as well. So then we're also making sure we're addressing the for all segment of it as well. When I'm talking about greener, we've now launched a project called product called EcoPack, and so with that, clearly we're using a lot more sustainable ingredients to make sure that we reduce the CO2 emissions in the environment. We also have what we call the Lafarge Holcim Foundation, where we're actually driving the thinking, the mindset shift. Remember, I said it was about collaboration. So again, we're working with a number of key experts in the field to try and make sure that we, even in terms of the thinking, let's start thinking differently. Let's be transformative. Let's be innovative. So there's a lot that we're doing in that regard, and we're very, very proud of what we're doing, and hence why we declared our commitment in terms of the net zero. So I think that just gives you, I know I've only got a minute, but I hope that just gives you an overview of what we're doing, that we are actually walking the talk as well as an organization. And if you factor that around the 18 markets also where Lafarge Holcim operates, that's a huge, huge shift.
This is a digitalization and innovation. And I think, Esther, there's a question that I'll address to you, and that's from Osama, and it says, how can we actually just get this to be the culture? So how do we just change mindset entirely? Get this, constantly thinking about embodied carbon to be the culture of all of us in this room.
Okay, so thank you. Again, I'll try to summarize everything in a minute. I think the best answer is actually something that the World Green Building Council has been popularizing, nature-based system. When something is not made locally, it's a much tougher job selling it to the local people. But if we start working with nature-based system, and I'm not advocating for abandoning the modern innovations, I'm advocating for hybrid. You mix what exists locally with the best that the technology can offer, then you're more likely to gain traction with the local people. I think many times when people bring in new products from abroad, they assume that because it's come from a foreign country, it's better. And we've seen this. I'm part of a community that's promoting the use of non-conventional building materials. And we've seen that when it is being brought in from the Western countries, especially, people already feel it's not within reach. So some of the things that we're also beginning to encourage people to do, look to other places that are similar, like Brazil. Brazil has had a lot of innovations with the use of bamboo, for example, as a structural materials. China is doing amazing things. So I think it's time for us to emphasize the sharing of best practices, especially from countries that have a lot in common with Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle Eastern context.
Oh, can I just add? I mean, you just reminded me, I know you don't have much time, but then there's also geocycle in terms of waste management. So what we otherwise would have considered to have been waste, it's something that we're actually now incorporating into our productions. And that in itself also reduces. So when you look at it, the entire value chain that we as an organization look at, so we recycle otherwise palm kernels, which otherwise would be deemed to be waste. We actually use that and use that as part of our production processes. And we also take that from other off-takers as well. So other organizations across Nigeria and Africa that we work with, we take that away from them as well. So it's just something to mention. When you also think about the fact that we manufacture cement, we also rehabilitate the quarries after we finished using them as well. So again, it's a sort of a root and branch shift and mindset that we as an organization at Lafarge Holcim and Lafarge Africa, in terms of what sustainability means to us.
And I think that that's great because it talks about circularity, which is essentially another mindset shift that we need to start having if we're looking at understanding that any material that we look at has got some form of embodied carbon. And so I love the whole concept of material bank, looking at innovation and digitization, looking at hybrid models. So not just getting rid of things or saying, this is bad, this is good, but saying, how do we get that transition into net zero? So what I'll do is I'll just quickly round the room. The question that I'll ask you is very simple. So based off our discussion, is net zero embodied carbon within reach for our Middle East and Africa region? So I'll start with Mina, Folashade, go to Esther, and then we'll close before I get in trouble as a moderator.
Thank you, Vere. It is within reach, but it will require, I would just say it will require 4 key actions. Because considering with nearly 50% of the population or also urban growth projected in this region by 2050, and with some of the fastest growing countries around the world, I say that Africa and Middle East play a key role in shaping not only what the global environment sector, but also the whole world will look like. And therefore, I think therefore embodied carbon especially needs to be tackled from multiple fronts. And we've touched upon these ones, but if I can summarize, one, first and foremost, is from the front of upskilling the academia and industry around embodied carbon. I think building that capacity and capabilities is really important. Secondly, I would say this cross-sector collaboration, which we emphasize a lot during our conversation, and also in parallel enabling a market transformation by investing as well as raising the demand on low carbon materials. And as an example, at SOM around the world in every project we're working on, we're actually putting pressure on manufacturers to provide environmental product declarations to enable us to specify low embodied carbon materials. And lastly, I think probably influencing policies is a key factor in this equation as well, to streamline that there's a minimum embodied carbon standard to be met across the sector, but also to ensure that the decisions that are taken at early project or design stages, for example, they actually become a reality when the built environments are constructed. So I think demanding that data collection and monitoring in use and or in life stage of the buildings will be key in ensuring that embodied carbon is and also remains within reach.
Okay, thank you. I see Dominica's online, so I'm not sure if we can get the last closing or we're done.
I'll just say 3 words out for us.
Okay.
I absolutely concur with what Mina just said. I think it's absolutely a yes. We need to all be smarter. We need to all be greener. And we certainly need to be much more innovative and transformative in our thinking. And we all need to be resolutely committed to this new way forward.
Esther, parting words. Is it in reach? Is net zero embodied carbon within reach, Middle East and Africa?
It is within reach. My main job at Penn State right now, I'm the director of the Global Building Network, and I took this job because I saw an opportunity to connect the lessons from the Western countries to the Middle East and African countries. We have a long history of using locally available resources. Let's take the best knowledge and the best technology that is out there and combine it with our own knowledge of local resources. We have the best art and architecture in the world in the Middle East and Africa. We can do this.
Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists. And thank you again, WorldGBC, for letting us start this conversation. Over to you, Dominica.
Thank you so much, Vere. And ladies, I think we have no choice but to schedule a follow-up webinar that's dedicated to this conversation, because the number of questions just coming in through the chat, clearly there's a ton of appetite for it. So we'll be reaching out back to you, and I hope you can join us again. Thank you, everybody. We are now set to start our next session. So as a reminder for anybody that has just joined, you have to click on the sessions icon and then choose the next session, which is called Fueling a New Positive Revolution. It's the name of the session. So we will see you all there. Thank you. Thank you, Vere. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you, Vere. Thank you.